Hello, students! In today's lesson, we will explore the final chapters of the French Revolution. It's quite an interesting story. It started with a cry for liberty, but it actually concluded with an emperor on the throne. So, how did that happen? Let's find out how the revolution ended and what powerful ideas it left behind for the entire world.
So, let's look at our agenda for today. First, we will see what happened after the Reign of Terror. Then, we will learn about the new government that was formed, which was called the Directory. After that, we'll try to understand why this government was so weak. This weakness is what allowed Napoleon to come to power, so we'll study his rise next. And finally, we will discuss the very important and lasting legacy of the revolution.
All right, let's begin. I want you to imagine the situation in France. The Reign of Terror has just ended, the Jacobin government has fallen. After all that chaos, what do you think the people of France wanted most of all? Peace. They were searching for stability. They desperately wanted things to go back to normal.
This timeline here shows us the key moments we are going to cover. Now, notice the year 1794. This is when the Jacobin Republic was overthrown. This is a very important turning point. After this, a new form of government was attempted, but as we will see, it did not last very long. And this eventually led to Napoleon Bonaparte becoming the Emperor of France in 1804. So, moving on. To avoid another situation like the Reign of Terror, everyone was very careful. They did not want one person, like Robespierre, to have all the power again. So what happened was that the wealthier middle classes took control, and they decided to create a new constitution and a new kind of government.
Now, this new government had an executive which was called a directory. So what was this directory? Well, it was made up of 5 members, or 5 directors. The idea was very simple: to prevent power from being concentrated in the hands of just one person. They thought that if 5 people are in charge, then no single person can become a dictator. Okay, let's look at the features of this new constitution. First, it was a step backwards for many ordinary people because voting rights were now denied to anyone who did not own property. So power went back to the wealthier sections of society. Second, it created 2 elected legislative councils. And what was their job? Well, these councils were the ones who would then appoint the 5 members of the directory. But you see, there was a problem with this new system. The very safeguard they had created to prevent a dictatorship, well, that became the source of its weakness. The government was just not stable.
This table shows the dilemma very clearly. Under the Jacobins, power was concentrated in one man, Robespierre, and this led to the Reign of Terror. But under the Directory, the power was divided among 5 men, and what did that lead to? Constant arguments and political instability. So, the main point to understand is that the directors were always clashing with the legislative councils. The councils would try to dismiss them, and the directors would push back. This constant infighting made the government very, very weak. It was unable to make firm decisions for the good of France.
Now, I want you to think about this. What happens when a country's government is weak and divided? It creates a power vacuum. And this political instability created the perfect opportunity for a strong leader to step in and take over.
This sentence from your textbook is the key takeaway here. It says, the political instability of the Directory paved the way for the rise of a military dictator, Napoleon Bonaparte. This means that the weakness of the Directory directly led to the rise of Napoleon. It is a clear cause and effect.
So, who was this Napoleon Bonaparte? Well, he was a very successful and popular army general. He saw how weak the Directory government was, and he used his military power to seize control. And then, in 1804, he crowned himself the Emperor of France. At first, many people saw Napoleon as a modernizer. He brought stability, and he introduced many new, modern laws. But he was also a dictator. His rule went against the revolutionary idea of a government that is elected by the people. He conquered large parts of Europe, and this put an end to many of the democratic ideals of the revolution. So even though the revolution ended with a military dictator, its most important contributions were not the governments, but the ideas. These ideas are the revolution's true legacy, and they absolutely changed the world.
And what were these core ideals? They were liberty, which means freedom, equality before the law, and fraternity, which means brotherhood. These 3 powerful ideas remained as inspiring principles. They motivated political movements all across France and the rest of Europe for the next 100 years.
These ideas were written down in important documents like the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. This document stated that certain rights, like the right to life, freedom of speech, and equality were natural rights. This means you are born with them. The government or the king cannot give them to you or take them away. And these ideas soon spread far beyond the borders of France.
And the legacy was truly global. These revolutionary ideas inspired many movements across Europe, and old feudal systems were abolished in many places. But it went even further. Colonized peoples in countries like our own India reinterpreted these ideas for their own struggles for freedom. The language of freedom and equality from the French Revolution inspired them to fight for their own independence.
So, the most important thing to remember is this. While the governments in France changed again and again, the revolutionary ideals of democratic rights and equality became a permanent part of politics, not just in France, but all around the world. That is the true legacy. This brings us to a final question to think about. The French Revolution began with a demand for liberty, but it ended with an emperor. So this makes us wonder, do revolutions always end the way people expect them to? I want you to think about that.